What happens when a man who has spent his life quietly living in the moment sits down on a show where drama is the house specialty? Tonight, we uncover how a polite interview with Graham Norton turned into an all-out televised reckoning as Keanu Reeves' calm demeanor was tested under the studio lights. Stick around because this showdown only gets deeper. It started as a charming chat and ended in a moment of sublime clarity. Before you judge, hear every pointed question that pushed Keanu to reveal his truth. This isn't just another celebrity interview. It's an existential reckoning. The studio was buzzing with excitement that night. The famous red sofa glowed under the lights. The audience murmured in anticipation. And Graham Norton was in his element, sipping water, checking his cards. That trademark mischievous grin plastered across his face. Everything was set for another entertaining evening. When Keanu Reeves walked onto the set, the cheers were deafening. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit and his usual humble, elegant style, Keanu smiled and gave a gentle wave that had endeared him to the world for years. He shook hands with Graham, then slid into his seat at the far end of the sofa. "Mr. Reeves," Graham said warmly, adjusting his cards as the applause faded. "It's not often we get a real legend on this sofa. How are you? How's life treating you these days?" Keanu smiled politely. "I'm good, Graham. Thank you. Life is a gift, just trying to be present and work on things that matter." The audience clapped again. Graham nodded thoughtfully, his eyes glinting. "Ah, yes, privacy," he mused. "We'll get to that later because I imagine privacy is hard when the whole world knows your name. But for now, let's talk about your latest projects. There's a new film coming out soon, isn't there?" Keanu smiled slightly and nodded, explaining the importance of storytelling and finding universal truths in the human experience. He spoke eloquently, and the audience nodded approvingly. For the first 5 minutes, everything was smooth. Graham threw in a few light-hearted jokes. Keanu played along. Laughter bounced around the studio, but then Graham's questions started to lean sharper. "So," Graham began, his smile still friendly, but his tone just a little more pointed. "You and your career, people have seen you step back. Or is it stepping away? I lose track. What exactly would you call it?" Keanu's jaw remained relaxed, though his smile was a little more reflective. "I just wanted to focus on my craft and my own work. That's all. No big mystery." "Of course," Graham said lightly, "but you do realize it looked to everyone else like you simply walked away. One day a box office king, the next, a man with a motorcycle company. Was that always the plan?" The audience chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to. Keanu's expression remained gentle. "It's not running away if you're leaving something in search of something else," he replied calmly. Graham raised his eyebrows but maintained his composure. "Ah, searching," he echoed, tapping his cards. "That word comes up a lot when people talk about you. Searching for meaning, searching for peace. Is there anything about Hollywood you did like?" Keanu leaned back and crossed his hands, his tone noticeably calmer now. "That's a fair question. I've been fortunate to work with so many talented people and tell incredible stories. But when it started to feel like the work itself was losing its purpose, it was time to change." "Losing purpose?" Graham pressed, still smiling but with a glint in his eye. "Because of the system or because of yourself?" Keanu's voice dropped half an octave. "Both." The temperature in the room shifted slightly. The audience sensed something building. Graham, unfazed, flipped to his next card. "Well, on that note, let's talk about your public image. Many people felt you never quite fit in with the Hollywood machine. Some even say you knew you wouldn't and went in with an agenda. How do you respond to that?" Keanu's smile was still there, but it was now a serene, knowing expression. He stared straight at Graham and said very calmly, "That's a curious idea, but frankly, an uninspired question." Graham gave a little laugh and held up his hands. "No offense intended. I'm just asking what's already out there. These are the things people say." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Maybe people shouldn't say things they know nothing about." A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Graham sensed it too, but he wasn't backing down. Of course," he replied smoothly. "But let's be honest. You've moved across the world, cut ties with some major studios, and yet you still keep popping up on magazine covers and TV screens. If you wanted a quiet life so badly, Why not just fade quietly into the background? That was the moment Keanu's calm veneer was tested. He let out a short but warm laugh. You really don't get it, do you, Graham? He said, his voice laced with gentle wisdom. Graham tilted his head slightly. Oh, I think I get it, but I'm curious to hear you explain it. Keanu's eyes were calm and steady. It's not about disappearing. It's about being present on your own terms and sharing your story before people like you try to turn it into something ugly. Graham sat back, fingers steepled. So, we're the problem. Keanu didn't answer. The tension was palpable now. The audience was still, the cameras were rolling, every pair of eyes locked on the two men as the temperature in the studio seemed to rise degree by degree. And this was only the beginning. The audience didn't dare breathe. Even the studio lights seemed hotter now. Keanu sat with a quiet stillness on the famous red sofa, his hands resting gently in his lap. Graham, by contrast, sat with the relaxed elegance of a man who'd seen 1,000 tense interviews before. But he could sense the depth of the man he was sitting next to, and he was ready for a deeper conversation. Well, Graham said after a beat, his smile almost apologetic, but his eyes glinting with curiosity. You've made it very clear you wanted to control your own story, Keanu. But surely you can see how it looks a little contradictory. You asked for peace and quiet, and yet here you are on my show in front of millions of people promoting your work. It's all rather public, isn't it? Keanu's lips curled ever so slightly into a gentle smile. There's a big difference between controlling your own story and letting the tabloids lie about it. Graham mused, leaning forward slightly. But doesn't telling your story invite scrutiny? The more you reveal, the more people will analyze. You can't really expect the world to simply accept your version without question, can you? Keanu's eyes were calm. You mean your version? Graham chuckled softly. I don't have a version, Keanu. I just have questions. There it was, a flash of insight in Keanu's eyes. And those questions are the same ones people have been asking for years. You don't care about the answers. You just want a headline. The audience murmured. Graham smiled tightly, steepling his fingers. All right then, he said. Let me try something different. You've said publicly that you felt unsupported by the Hollywood system at times. Can you tell us specifically what support you expected? What help you asked for that was denied? Keanu exhaled calmly through his nose. I expected them to believe in the creative vision, and they didn't. They didn't, Keanu said calmly. Next question. Graham raised an eyebrow but continued, flipping to the next card. Very well. You've also said that Hollywood's treatment of actors has played a large role in your decision to step back. But many in the public feel that criticism was more about your choices than the system itself. Do you think you're being entirely fair when you paint it all with the brush of systemic issues? Keanu's head remained still, as though he was considering the question. Excuse me, he said, his voice quiet. It's just a question, Graham said, his tone even. Some feel you've used accusations of systemic problems to silence legitimate criticism. Do you see how that might come across? Keanu leaned forward now, his voice rising, but with an almost zen-like patience. No, Graham, what I see is someone trying to justify the status quo because it's dressed up as opinion. The audience gasped at the calmness of his tone. Graham didn't flinch. Of course, he said calmly, but isn't it also dangerous to assume that every negative comment is rooted in systemic injustice? Sometimes people simply don't like you or your choices. That's not necessarily prejudice, is it? Keanu was calm now. You're walking a very fine line, Graham. Graham's smile tightened into something colder. I'm walking the same line I walk with every guest, Keanu. I ask questions the public wants answered. If those questions are difficult, perhaps that says more about the answers than about me. The air between them was electric now. The other guests on the sofa had shrunk into the shadows, visibly uncomfortable. Even the audience, so loud and lively at the beginning, was hushed now, hanging on every syllable. All right, Graham continued after a long pause. Let's move on. You've described Hollywood as an institution. Some would say that sounds rather impersonal for your own life's work. Do you feel there's still love there? Or is it just duty and obligation at this point? Keanu's nostrils flared, his fingers still resting calmly on his knees. "I love the craft," he said slowly, his voice low and tense. "But love isn't enough when loyalty only goes one way." "Interesting," Graham murmured. "Do you think they feel the same about you? That you've been disloyal to them?" Keanu turned sharply toward him. "You don't know them, you don't know me, so don't pretend you understand." Graham's tone stayed smooth as silk. "I'm only asking what millions of viewers are already thinking." Keanu shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "You're not asking, you're accusing. That's what you do, isn't it? Dress up mockery and judgment and entertainment." Graham's smile flickered. "Entertainment and journalism aren't mutually exclusive," he replied softly. Keanu's voice rose a notch, but his composure was unshakable. "You think this is journalism? You think dragging people onto your sofa and picking them apart like they're animals in a zoo is journalism?" "Keanu," Graham began, but Keanu cut him off, his voice calm now, slicing through the studio silence. "No, don't. You sit there with your cards and your smirk, and you think you can just toy with people. You think because you make people laugh, you're not hurting anyone. But you are. You're just too smug to see it." The words hung in the air, the silence deafening. For the first time all night, Graham's expression hardened. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Keanu's. "And you," he said evenly, his voice quiet but edged with steel, "think because you've suffered, you're beyond reproach. But you're not. You came here knowing the questions that would come, and now you're proving exactly why people think you can't handle them." Keanu froze, his eyes unwavering, his breathing steady. The audience sat in stunned silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a dull knife. Keanu's hands remained calm in his lap, and for a brief moment, it looked like he might just walk off right then. But instead, he stayed for now. For a few seconds, the entire studio was frozen. The audience sat wide-eyed and silent, the air thick with anticipation. The cameras kept rolling, capturing everything. The serene expression on Keanu's face, the faint glimmer of challenge in Graham's eyes, and the awkward, almost frightened expressions of the other guests on the sofa, who looked like they wanted to melt into the cushions. Keanu's breathing was audible now, slow but steady. His posture was serene, his hands clasped so gently his knuckles were relaxed. Graham, in stark contrast, leaned back in his chair with calm precision, his fingers steepled in front of him. The silence was broken when Graham gently said, "You seem upset." The words were soft but sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. Keanu's head snapped toward him, his eyes unwavering. "Upset? You think this is upset? You sit here, Graham, making veiled jabs at me, at my work, at my choices, and you think I don't notice? You think I don't know exactly what you're doing?" Graham's expression didn't change. "And what exactly am I doing?" "You're turning me into a spectacle," Keanu said. "That's what you do. That's what this show does. You bring people here, make them feel welcome, then cut them down for sport, all while pretending it's just a bit of harmless fun." Graham tilted his head slightly, his voice still measured. "And you came anyway, knowing all that. Why?" The question seemed to strike Keanu not as a physical blow, but as a deep philosophical point. He blinked hard as though trying to formulate a precise answer, but the calm didn't fade. "I came because I thought maybe you'd be different," he said softly. "Maybe you'd treat me like a human being, not just another headline." Graham's smile hardened, though it never reached his eyes. "I've treated you exactly like every other guest who sat here. Nothing more, nothing less. You're the one who seems to think the rules shouldn't apply to you." Keanu's posture remained still. "Oh, don't give me that sanctimonious nonsense," he replied calmly. "You think you're better than the tabloids just because you say it with a laugh, but you're not. You're worse. At least they're honest about what they are." The audience let out a collective murmur at that. Some gasping softly. Graham's brow furrowed, his tone sharpening ever so slightly. "Worse? You're accusing me of being worse than the papers that have hounded you for decades? Is that what you're saying?" Keanu remained seated, his face serene. "Don't you dare conflate this with their actions," he said, his voice echoing across the studio. Don't you dare. Even Graham leaned back slightly at the sudden stillness. The other guests froze, their eyes darting between the two men. Keanu, Graham said after a moment, his voice even but with an unmistakable edge. You've spent years invoking your philosophy when it suits your narrative. But when someone else uses it, suddenly it's off limits. That's a double standard, isn't it? Keanu's posture was solid as he stared down at Graham. You don't know what you're talking about, he said through calm teeth. Then explain it to me, Graham pressed, still seated, still calm. Help me understand. Help the audience understand. You keep saying you want your truth to be heard, so tell it. But don't stand there and accuse everyone of bad faith just because the questions are hard. Keanu laughed softly, shaking his head. You think this is about hard questions? You think this is journalism? This is just another circus. You don't care about answers. You don't care about truth. You just care about how many people tune in to watch me squirm. Graham's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't look away. That's an interesting theory, he said quietly. But the only one making you squirm is you. That was it. Keanu's composure for the first time revealed a flicker of a different emotion. His voice rose to a normal speaking volume, his accent clearer than ever. You think this is a show, don't you? You think this is all just good fun. You think people's lives, my life, is just entertainment for you to poke at and laugh about. Well, congratulations, Graham. You've gotten what you wanted. He took a deep breath, and his face was calm and accepting. But let me tell you something. This isn't just some joke. This isn't some game. You're playing with people's hearts, and you don't even care. You call yourself a host, a journalist, whatever, but you're just another bully with a microphone and an audience. The audience was dead silent now. Not even a cough, not even a whisper. Just the faint hum of the studio lights and the sound of Keanu's steady breathing. Graham's eyes narrowed, and for the first time all night, his voice carried a chill that cut through the air. If that's how you feel, Keanu, then perhaps you shouldn't have come because nobody forced you into that chair. You chose to sit there. You chose to speak. And now that the questions don't suit you, you are calling me a bully. Keanu leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to a calm, direct tone, though the microphone still picked it up clearly. You don't deserve to sit there. You don't deserve to talk about people like me. You're a parasite. You invite people here just to humiliate them, to make them look small so you can feel big. The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Graham didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. He stood slowly, matching Keanu's height, and the two of them locked eyes, neither willing to break. Maybe, Graham said finally, his voice low but firm, you should ask yourself why you feel so small in the first place. That was the final spark. Keanu sighed gently, a sound of release. That's it, he said, his voice calm. I'm done. You think you can drag me and my family through the mud and call it entertainment? You think you're clever? You think you're better than everyone you humiliate up here? Well, you're not. You're pathetic. This whole show is pathetic. He turned to the audience now, gesturing broadly with one arm. And you lot, you sit here laughing along while he tears people to shreds. Do you feel good about yourselves, do you? Nobody answered. Keanu turned back to Graham, his voice shaking with a quiet intensity, but loud enough to fill the room. You are everything that's wrong with this country, with this world. You dress up cruelty as wit and call it a job. Well, you can keep it, Graham, because I won't play your game. And with that, he turned sharply and walked toward the exit, not storming, but with a quiet, resolute purpose. The cameras followed him as his footsteps echoed against the studio floor, his back straight, his hands unclenched. Graham remained standing behind his desk, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The door closed behind Keanu with a quiet click. The audience sat frozen, and Graham, after a long, heavy pause, finally exhaled and said softly, almost to himself, well, that was something else. The camera zoomed in on his face as he straightened his jacket, his eyes still fixed on the door where Keanu had disappeared. The door closed behind Keanu with a quiet click that seemed to echo through every corner of the studio. For several long, breathless seconds, the audience simply sat there, stunned. No one clapped. No one spoke. The sound of Keanu's purposeful footsteps faded down the corridor beyond the set, and then nothing but silence. The other guests on the sofa exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure whether they should stay put or quietly slip away. The camera stayed locked on Graham, who stood behind his desk, hands resting on the wood, staring at the door through which Keanu had exited. Then finally, Graham straightened his jacket, let out a slow breath, and turned back to face the audience, his signature dry smile returning, though this time edged with steel. "Well," he said dryly, "that was meditative." A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the audience, breaking the spell. Some clapped politely. Graham held up a hand to quiet them, his tone suddenly serious. "Look," he began, "I want to say something here, because clearly tonight went in a direction none of us expected, least of all me. But here's the thing." He paused, scanning the audience, and then glancing straight into the camera. "I've been doing this job a very long time," he said, his voice even but deliberate. "And in that time, I've had everyone on this sofa, rock stars, presidents, prime ministers, actors, authors, saints, and sinners. Some of them charming, some of them difficult, all of them human." He tapped the desk lightly. "And what we do here on this stage is ask questions. Sometimes they're easy questions. Sometimes they're hard, but they're questions people deserve to hear answered. That's not bullying. That's not cruelty. That's conversation. And if a guest can't handle that, perhaps they shouldn't agree to sit in this chair." The audience broke into scattered applause, though Graham waved it down with a faint smile. "I have nothing but respect for Keanu's journey," he continued, his voice softening just slightly, "for what he went through and what he continues to endure. But respect," he added, his tone sharpening again, "doesn't exempt anyone from scrutiny, especially when they voluntarily put themselves in the spotlight." He leaned forward now, his eyes glittering. "Because make no mistake," he said, "that wasn't me attacking him. That was him attacking his own past. What you just saw wasn't cruelty from me. It was a man so determined to live his truth that he couldn't stand being asked the simplest questions about it. And that says more about him than it does about me." The audience murmured in agreement, some even clapping again, louder this time. Graham's gaze drifted to the floor for a moment, then back to the camera. "And to Keanu, if you're watching this later, I wish you and your family nothing but peace. But if you come here to tell your story, don't expect me or anyone else to just nod along and smile, because that's not honesty. That's theater. And this show is not theater. This is a conversation." He gave a faint shrug, then sat back down in his chair, picking up a cue card. "Well," he said, his signature wit re-emerging to lighten the mood, "that was Keanu Reeves, everyone, for about 15 minutes. Anyway," the audience laughed, this time more freely, the tension finally breaking. "Coming up next," Graham said, glancing at the other guests still seated on the sofa, who were now visibly relieved, "we'll be joined by someone who doesn't mind answering questions, or at least hasn't walked out yet." The camera pulled back slightly as Graham chuckled softly to himself, shuffling his cards as if nothing had happened, though the slight smirk on his face said otherwise. But then he looked straight into the lens one last time, his eyes narrowing playfully. "And for anyone at home who's moved by what you've just seen, don't be," he said, "because the truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not. And tonight you all saw it for yourselves." He leaned back, spread his arms casually, and let the studio lights shine down on him as the applause swelled around him once more. And there you have it, the unforgettable night Keanu Reeves walked off the Graham Norton show, leaving a stunned audience and a host who refused to back down. If you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes breakdown of one of the most intense talk show moments ever, don't forget to hit that like button. Leave a comment below. Do you think Graham went too far, or was Keanu out of line? And of course, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth may be uncomfortable, but it's always worth hearing.